Conservatives will always stand up for a politics that unites us rather than divides us. That used to be Labour's position too. But when I look at its leadership today, I worry it's no longer the case. Just compare Jeremy Corbyn's behaviour to that of his predecessors. Would Neil Kinnock, who stood up to the hard left, have stood by while his own MPs faced deselection and needed police protection at their party conference? Leadership is doing what you believe to be right and having the courage and determination to see it through. And that is the approach I have taken on Brexit. We've had disagreements in this party about Britain's membership of the EU for a long time, so it's no surprise that we've had a range of different views expressed this week. But my job as Prime Minister is to do what I believe to be in the national interest. And that means two things. First, honouring the result of the referendum. MPs asked the British people to take this decision. We put our faith in their judgment. They have put their faith in us to deliver. I will not let them down.
We all hoped that the people's decision would be followed by effective and responsible negotiations that would protect living standards and jobs. Instead, the main negotiations that have been taking place are actually between different factions of the Tory party, and the only job the government is fighting to protect is that of the Prime Minister. Theresa May used to say that no deal is better than a bad deal. Yet now, after 2 years of botched negotiations, she's threatening the country with just that choice: a bad deal or no deal. That is a threat to our whole economy, especially our manufacturing industry, and to the tens of thousands of skilled jobs in the supply chains here in Britain. Now, time is running out. Companies are losing patience in the absence of any clarity from the government. They are planning to relocate jobs abroad and in taking investment with them. Some have already started, and I fear more will follow. The Tories are well aware of this, but some see Brexit as their opportunity to impose a free market shock doctrine on Britain. The Prime Minister is in New York today, promising that a post-Brexit Britain will offer the lowest corporation taxes of all G20 nations. Handouts to the few, paid for by the many, and an already tried and failed strategy for boosting investment. Sajid Javid has set out his plan for more tax giveaways and ripping up people's pensions rights. Liam Fox is itching to secure and scrap workers' rights and privatise the NHS with a side order of chlorinated chicken. And then there's Jacob Rees-Mogg. No, Jacob has expressed his personal faith in Brexit Britain. It's personal, and he's expressed it so nicely, because he's decided to base his new investment fund in the Eurozone. The Tory Brexiteers unite the politics of the 1950s with the economics of the 19th century, daydreaming about a Britannia that both rules the waves and waves the rules.
I will reveal that I have one overriding anxiety about the current political scene, both domestic and international. And it isn't global warming or terrorism or Rouhani's Iran or Putin's Russia, real though those challenges are. It isn't the negotiating tactics of Jean-Claude Juncker, whether before or after lunch. It's not even the economic and political catastrophe that would befall us in the event of a Corbyn government, horrifying though I find that idea. My friends, the one thing I really worry about in this critical autumn of 2018 is that after 200 years, this oldest and most successful of all political parties should somehow lose confidence in its basic belief in freedom. After 1,000 years of independence, this country might really lose confidence in its democratic institutions, and that we should be so demoralized and so exhausted as to submit our institutions forever, indefinitely, to foreign rule. And if I have a function here today, it is to try, with all humility, to put some lead into the collective pencil, to stop what seems to me to be a ridiculous seeping away of our self-belief, and to invite you to feel a realistic and justified confidence in what we can do. Not in a spirit of jingo or glib partisanship, because I know that this is a time of trial. And it is precisely because our position is so serious and the decisions before us are so vital that it is more necessary than ever that we feel that quiet and legitimate confidence in our country.
No one wants a good deal more than me, but that has never meant getting a deal at any cost. Britain isn't afraid to leave with no deal if we have to, but we need to be honest about it. Leaving without a deal, introducing tariffs and costly checks at the border, would be a bad outcome for the UK and the EU. It would be tough at first, but the resilience and ingenuity of the British people would see us through. Some people ask me to rule out no deal. But if I did that, I would weaken our negotiating position and have to agree to whatever the EU offers. And at the moment, that would mean accepting one of two things. Either a deal that keeps us in the EU in all but name, keeps free movement, keeps vast annual payments, and stops us signing trade deals with other countries, or a deal that carves off Northern Ireland, a part of this country, effectively leaving it in the EU's customs union. So let us send a clear message from this hall today. We will never accept either of those choices.
Let me say to the country, as it stands, Labour will vote against the Chequers plan, or whatever is left of it, and oppose leaving the EU with no deal. Inconceivable that we should crash out of Europe with no deal. It would be a national disaster. That is why, if Parliament votes down a Tory deal, or the government fails to reach any deal at all, we would press for a general election. Failing that, all options are on the table.
We have a Labour Party that, if they were in government, would accept any deal the EU chose to offer, regardless of how bad it was for the UK. But who also say they'll oppose any deal I choose to bring back, regardless of how good it is for the UK. They're not acting in the national interest, but their own political interest.
Most of all, a commitment to a Brexit that protects the jobs, the economy and trade, and determined opposition to one that does not. Labour's plans to rebuild and transform our country and its relationship with the rest of the world having to be made against the backdrop of huge uncertainty about Brexit. Labour respects the decision of the British people in the referendum, but no one can respect the conduct of the British government since the vote took place. Labour's job is now to win support for a deal that meets the needs of the country, combined with our plan to rebuild and transform, with investment in our people and our economy. Our priority is clear. We aim to get the best Brexit deal for jobs and living standards to underpin our plans to upgrade our economy and invest in every community and every region. That will bring people together and meet concerns of both those who voted leave and those who voted remain. Conference, the way ahead is clear. We will vote against any reduction in rights, standards, protections, and oppose a deregulatory race to the bottom.
Will not only be prevented by the Chequers deal from offering our tariff schedules, we will be unable to make our own laws, to vary our regulatory framework for goods, agri-foods, and much more besides. And that is politically humiliating for a £2 trillion economy. And it occurs to me that the authors of Chequers risk prosecution under the 14th century statute of praemunire which says that no foreign court or government shall have jurisdiction in this country. It would mean that UK business and industry, the entire economy, would be exposed perpetually to regulations that might have been expressly designed at the behest of foreign competitors to do them down. It would mean that whatever the EU came up with in future, banning the sale of eggs by the dozen, banning diabetics from driving, banning vaping, whatever, and all those have been at least considered by Brussels in the last few years. All this nonsense we would have to implement with no ability to change or resist. That is not pragmatic. That is not a compromise. It is dangerous and unstable, politically and economically. My fellow Conservatives, this is not democracy. That is not what we voted for.
We will not betray the result of the referendum, and we will never break up our country. Now, in a negotiation, if you can't accept what the other side proposes, you present an alternative. And this is what we have done. Our proposal is for a free trade deal that provides for frictionless trade in goods. It would protect hundreds of thousands of jobs in the just-in-time supply chains our manufacturing firms rely on. Businesses wouldn't face costly checks when they export to the EU, so they can invest with confidence. And it would protect our precious union, the seamless border in Northern Ireland, a bedrock of peace and stability, would see no change whatsoever. No simple free trade agreement could achieve that, not even one that makes use of the very latest technology. Our proposal would be good for our rural communities, getting us out of the common agricultural policy. It will be good for our coastal communities. We will be out of the common fisheries policy, an independent coastal state once again. And with the UK's biggest fishing fleets based in Scotland, let me say this to Nicola Sturgeon. You claim to stand up for Scotland, but you want to lock Scottish fishermen into the common fisheries policy forever. That's not stronger for Scotland, it's a betrayal of Scotland.
This is the moment to chuck Chequers, to scrap the Commission's constitutionally abominable Northern Ireland backstop, use the otherwise redundant and miserable implementation period to the end of 2020 to negotiate the Super Canada FTA, the Free Trade Agreement, to invest in all the customs procedures that we will need to ensure continued frictionless trade, and to prepare much more vigorously than hitherto for coming out on WTO terms.
Something's changed for the worse. I feel it, and I'm sure you do too. Rigorous debate between political opponents is becoming more like a confrontation between enemies. We all saw the sickening pictures of a far-left extremist shouting abuse at Jacob Rees-Mogg's children. You don't have to agree with a word Diane Abbott says to believe passionately in her right to say it, free from threats and abuse. So let's rise above the abuse.
We can never be complacent about the scourge of racism. Race hate is a growing threat that has to be confronted, not just here in Britain, but across Europe and the United States. The far right is on the rise, doing what they always do, blaming minorities, Jews, Muslims, migrants, for the failure of a broken economic system. This party, this movement, will always be implacable campaigners against anti-Semitism and racism in all its forms. Its victims include the Windrush generation, who helped rebuild Britain after the war, and then were thrown under the bus by a government that reckoned there were votes to be had by pandering to prejudice. The hostile environment policies, shameful brainchild of the present Prime Minister, led to the scandal, and the scandal it is, of British citizens being deported, detained, and left destitute. This is a nasty, cynical politics that demeans our whole country. Our party will never stay silent in the face of growing Islamophobia, whether from the far right on the streets, or the former Foreign Secretary's disgraceful dog-whistle jibes at Muslim women.
If Chequers is agreed, I'm afraid it will only embolden those who are now calling for a second referendum. And these are the same people, incidentally, who explicitly, some of them distinguished former prime ministers and so on, who explicitly, I remember it, you all remember it, explicitly told the electorate in 2016 that if they voted Leave, there was no going back. Remember that? No second chances. That was it. We're leaving the customs union and the single market. They now say that no such thing was on the agenda, but that was what they said then. And they said that the people had to get it right in 2016 because they would never be asked again. And they are now cynically campaigning to do just that in a way that I think would be disastrous for trust in politics. People will see that they are simply being asked to vote again until they give the side that wants to stay in the EU the answer that it wants. And as Ruth Davidson has rightly pointed out, we cannot tell the Scots that they've made a decision to reject independence for a generation in their referendum, and then ask the UK population to vote again on the EU. The idea of a second vote is infamous, but the obvious democratic fragility of the Chequers proposals will only intensify such calls. And do not believe them, finally, when they say there is no other plan and no alternative. It's not my plan, it's not the IEA plan or the ERG plan. All these models, excellent there they are, and substantially the same. Super Canada deal, free trade deal, plus a deep and special partnership with our friends and partners in the EU. They're all derived from the Prime Minister's own vision at Lancaster House.
And there are plenty of prominent people in British politics, in Parliament and out of it, who want to stop Brexit in its tracks. Their latest plan is to hold a second referendum. They call it a people's vote. But we had the people's vote, and the people chose to leave. A second referendum would be a politician's vote. Politicians telling people they got it wrong the first time and should try again. Think for a moment what it would do to faith in our democracy if, having asked the people of this country to take this decision, politicians tried to overturn it. Those of us who do respect the result, whichever side of the question we stood on 2 years ago, need to come together now. If we don't, if we all go off in different directions in pursuit of our own visions of the perfect Brexit, we risk ending up with no Brexit at all. Our proposal would mean we could renew our role in the world, strike new trade deals with other countries. With control of our money, we can spend more on our NHS. With control of our laws, we can bring decision-making closer to the people and return powers to Westminster, Edinburgh, Cardiff, and Belfast. And with control of our borders, we can do something that no British government has been able to do in decades. Restore full and complete control of who comes into this country to the democratically elected representatives of the British people.
And instead of treating business as though it was somehow morally dubious, we Conservatives should celebrate its power to do good and the success of British business today. The only country in the world to have a trade surplus in music with America. Our manufacturing ingenuity, to my mind, gets daily more boggling. I think of the factory that makes bus stops, that it exports to Las Vegas. Bus stops, by the way, in a factory in Uxbridge, as it happens to be. And you wake up in Las Vegas, as I'm sure some of you have done, with a hangover, out in the street, and the chances are that you look up, there's a little piece of Uxbridge shielding you from the elements. Now is the time to turbocharge those exports, as Liam Fox has rightly said, and to be truly global again. Now, not long ago, I became the first foreign secretary to visit Peru. And I wondered why it had taken 52 years for a British foreign secretary to go again to Peru, an incredible place. It can't have been the indiscretions of Lord George Brown. It was 25 years since any of my predecessors went either to Chile or to Argentina. I'll tell you why, my friends. It was because our global strategy, our diplomatic, our political, our commercial strategy was focused on the EU. And of course, that was sensible in the 1970s. That certainly felt right in the 1970s when we first joined the common market. It makes much less sense today in the globalized economy when 95% of the world's growth is going to be outside the EU. And of course, the EU is and always will be colossally important to us. But the rest of the world is proportionally gaining ground. And I was thrilled to find that even though our trade with these Latin American countries is still relatively small, way behind our competitors, the UK is already the second biggest investor in Peru. We already do the second largest quota of Argentinian Malbec. And following the success of the 2012 Olympics, which I forgot to mention earlier on, there are British consultants helping with the Pan American Games in Lima. And these are just the beginnings. Think what we could do if we had proper free trade deals. And that is why it is so sad and so desperately wrong that we are preparing to agree terms with Brussels that will make it much more difficult, if not impossible, to do such deals. And that's why it was such a mistake of us to leave on the Chequers terms, locked in the tractor beam of Brussels. It is a constitutional outrage. It's not taking back control, it's forfeiting control. And by the way, they know it in Brussels. Don't be fooled by the suggestion that the EU will ultimately reject these proposals. Because what they want above all is to demonstrate to any other country that might dream of following suit that you cannot leave the EU without suffering adverse political and economic consequences. And what the Chequers proposals show is that the United Kingdom, for all its power and might and network of influences around the world, for all its venerable parliamentary history, was unable, ultimately, to take back control. And instead of reasserting our ability to make our laws, the UK will be effectively paraded in manacles down the Rue de la Loi like karatekas.
I have treated the European Union with nothing but respect. The United Kingdom expects the same.
Out to the Prime Minister. You see, I reach out to everybody who's currently apparently doing the negotiations. Brexit is about the future of our country and our vital interests. It's not about leadership squabbles or parliamentary posturing. I say this to her in all sincerity and helpfulness. If you deliver a deal that includes a customs union and no hard border in Ireland, if you protect jobs, people's rights at work and environmental and consumer standards, then we will support that sensible deal, a deal that would be backed by most of businesses in the world and trade unions. But if you can't negotiate that deal, then you need to make way for a party that can and will. A Labour government investing in Britain after years of austerity and neglect, bringing our country together after a decade of division. Conference, let every constituency, every community know Labour is ready, confident in our ideas, clear in our plans, committed to rebuild Britain. We don't want to live in a society where some of our fellow citizens sleep rough. A strong society is one that gives all young people the chance to realise their potential, and in which all of us know that if our parents need care, they will get it. Our task is to build Britain. Build a Britain together. Build a Britain for that security together, and we can! Thank you, Conference!
We are entering the toughest phase of the negotiations. You saw in Salzburg that I am standing up for Britain. What we are proposing is very challenging for the EU. But if we stick together and hold our nerve, I know we can get a deal that delivers for Britain. The people we serve are not interested in debates about the theory of Brexit. Their livelihoods depend on making a success of it in practice. A Brexit that might make Britain stronger 50 years from now is no good to you if it makes your life harder today. If you work in a factory in Pendle, you need a Brexit that keeps trade friction-free and supply chains flowing. If you're a fisherman in Peterhead, you need a Brexit that delivers full control of our waters. If you run an exporting business in Penarth, you need a Brexit that will open up new global markets. If you live in Pettigo on the Irish border, you need a Brexit that keeps it frictionless and communities connected. These things matter to you, so they matter to me. You are the people we are all here to serve, and together we will build a brighter future for the whole United Kingdom. We stand at a pivotal moment in our history. It falls to our party to lead our country through it. When we come together, there is no limit to what we can achieve. Ours is a great country. Our future is in our hands. Together, let's seize it. Together, let's build a better Britain.
Do not believe that we can somehow get it wrong now, bodge it now, and fix it later. Get out properly in a year or two. The opposite will take place. I've been watching the EU professionally for 30 years, and every time a referendum goes against the federalist cause, I have seen how the centripetal forces lock on, and slowly, the offending country is winched back into place. And by its manifest democratic injustice, Chequers provides the perfect logic and argument for those who want Britain to return to the EU, and is therefore a recipe for continued acrimony. And now, therefore, is the time truly to take back control and follow that vision, make the elegant, dignified, and grateful exit the country voted for. If we get it right, then the opportunities, frankly, are immense. It's not just that we can then do proper free trade deals, proper full-fat free trade deals. In so many areas of the 21st century economy, this country is already light years ahead. Tech, data, biosciences, financial services, you name it, we're the leaders. And we can use our regulatory freedom to entrench and to intensify those advantages. And of course, our European friends and partners can see that that might be possible. And that's exactly why they want to constrain us. And yet I would argue that it's actually in their interests too, to have the 5th largest economy in the world on their doorstep, acting as a continuing brake and caution to the over-regulatory instincts that have held the EU back and held EU growth back for so long. Instead of being relentlessly homogenized, we can actually learn from each other again in the spirit of friendly emulation that inspired the renaissance of European civilization. If we get this right, it can be win-win for both sides of the channel. If we get it wrong, if we bottle Brexit now, believe me, the people of this country will find it hard to forgive. If we get it wrong now and we proceed with this undemocratic solution, if we remain half in, half out, we will protract this toxic, tedious business that is frankly so off-putting to sensible middle-of-the-road people who want us to stop talking about Europe and get on with their domestic priorities, and who currently feel that they have, because of the level of Brexcosis, that they have no home in any political party. If we cheat the electorate, and Chequers is a cheat, we will escalate that sense of mistrust. We will give credence to those who cry betrayal, and I'm afraid we will make it more likely that the ultimate beneficiary of Chequers will be the far right, in the form of UKIP, possibly others, and therefore the far left in the form of Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn, by the way, a man who takes money from Iranian TV, who can barely bring himself to condemn the Russian state for the Salisbury atrocity, and who indulges anti-Semitism, and who, by opportunistically now committing himself to a second referendum reveals himself to be the patsy of the EU as well. Thank you all for coming along here today. And I hope you will join me in urging our friends in government to deliver what the people voted for. To back Theresa May in the best way possible by softly and quietly and sensibly supporting her original plan. And in so doing, to show confidence in conservatism and to show confidence in our country. Because if we get it wrong, we will be punished. But if we get it right, we can and will have a glorious future. And this government will be remembered for having done something brave and right and remarkable and in accordance with the wishes of the people. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Join in the debate below and subscribe.
Thank you.